This weekly webinar series by New Zealand's exporters for New Zealand's exporters. As together we carve a path through the current crisis towards greater prosperity for ourselves, our businesses, our community and our country. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Richard Shirtcliffe, all the way from Boulder in Colorado in the US. Richard has got a huge CV tracking all my favourite things, including coffee and beer, and now he's in a very special place in sustainable business. Richard, good morning, welcome.
Hey Andy, how you doing?
So tell me a little bit about the backstory here that's got you there for the start. It's like your CV reads like an absolute delight to me. Like all my favourite vices, coffee, beer, like it's just amazing. And now sustainability and sitting down, all into one CV. It's like this is your latest venture, Richard. Noho's only come about in the last 2 or 3 years. Give us a little bit of feel for what you've been up to and what's been keeping you busy.
It's very nice of you to describe it in such positive terms, Andy. If I read my own CV, it reads a little like it was designed by a one-legged indigent wandering away from the bar, honestly. But it's certainly not linear. No, look, I guess I tend to follow passion projects, and so it takes me in peculiar ways. If I really was smart, I'd probably stick with a segment or a sector and really learn lots about it and grow something within that single market. But I think things outside of that segment fascinate me, and off I go. So yeah, that's why it's not exactly linear. But how did I get here? Well, Noho is sort of a culmination of a series of epiphanies, if you like. It didn't, in essence, start with me. It started with the incredibly talented designers at Formway, who have been designing performance ergonomics in office seating for decades. And they had been querying of themselves, why is it that we go to the office to sit on the best, most comfortable, most physiologically supportive seating, and when we come home we sit on stuff which is akin to what the Romans sat on 2,000 years ago. Why do we do that to our bodies at home? So they've been considering, how do we bring that dynamic comfort into the family home, and they've been pondering that for a number of years. Meanwhile, I was a little burnt out after my last gig running Coffee Supreme. So my wife Sarah and I decided we would go away with fresh kind of start, if you like. We'd head off and go and live in Indonesia with the kids, and we're keen kite surfers, so we'd teach them to surf, and we would try and learn to surf at the same time. And day 2, this was happening, and it was just amazing. At one point I remember, miraculously, because I can't surf to save my life, popping up on the board at the same time as everyone in the family did it on the same wave, including my youngest, who was 4 at the time, and thinking this is just magic. And then a little later on thinking, the only thing that's just not magic about this is just the volume of plastic that's washing around my children. Right. And I just cannot believe that no one here thinks this is odd, and including my children, for whom it just seemed kind of normal. And yet it wasn't something we face on a daily basis back in New Zealand, not to that degree. Yeah. So over the course of the couple of months, Sarah and I got talking about what is it that we've got to do in order to conquer the plastics issue, because it's a subset of the climate issue. It's a winnable battle. It's going to take this complex matrix of regulation and prevention and extraction, and we can be part of it if we can figure out how. And we determined that one way to be part of it was to create commercial value in the trash, sort of the trash to treasure nexus. But we didn't really have an idea of what that would look like at that stage. And I got back to New Zealand a couple of months later, and I got talking to old friend and sparring partner Richard Shirtcliffe, and he said, look, we've got this thing happening at Formway and it's magic, and you should come and see it and help us take it to market. And I got out there and they showed me the Noho move chair, which blew my mind, because it flexes and rocks with the body. Just one moment, Andy. No, I'm sorry, sweetheart, I'm actually on a live call, so I can't talk right now. Okay. Later, okay. You have to talk to Mama, and you have to talk to Mummy.
You are joining of people being interrupted. This is the new normal. This is why I love going to home. It's just, yeah.
I actually love the humanity of it. You just get a little window into everybody's life. There's a six-year-old daughter going on 16, creating havoc for me. Anyway, so Richard called me out for me. We had a look at the product, and I said, "Look, guys, can you make it out of ocean plastic?" And they said, "Yeah, we've been thinking about that. We haven't quite cracked it yet." And I said, I think if we can do that, then it's more than a product. It's more than a go-to-market strategy for a product. It's a brand. We can build a brand whose twin pillars are ecology, sustainability, and well-being of the individual, and away we'll go. And the conversation turned to how we'd go to market, and we decided it would be D2C, and way we went. So that was really how I got into it. I had long wanted to do something way more sustainable than the stuff I'd done before. So in the Coffee Supreme days and in the Tuatara days, I had tried to blend into those businesses sustainability. And when I say sustainability, I don't just mean around ecology, I mean around people. Creating roles like head of people health, and whatnot. It was a key part of my thinking, trying to get, for example, Coffee Supreme away from non-sustainable packaging and onto recyclable packaging and all that sort of stuff. So this had been part of my thinking for some time, but I'd never had a pure play sustainable business. And so that's why I got excited about this.
So is it easier, actually, with a little bit of hindsight, to build a sustainable business from the ground up, as opposed to trying to retrofit and to adapt to the other businesses that you've been in? You've got B Corp status, so like you've plainly got all the big building blocks in place. It's like, should we be encouraging people to do what they can, or should we be encouraging entrepreneurs to actually make the biggest difference and to build sustainability from the ground up?
Both of those things. I mean, I think there's no question that it is harder to retrofit into an organization sustainable thinking, because if it's got a history of non-sustainable people practices or non-sustainable product practices, you've really got to unwind all of that and start again. And I'm getting interrupted again. I'm on the phone. Sorry, mate.
Friday evening game.
That's number 2. So we visit from number 3 in a moment. But look, so I think it is easier to start from the ground up and say, look, this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to be negotiable on these things. And as soon as you decide that, and decide you're going to be values driven, everything you do is going to be sheeted home to those values, then you start making tougher, it's fair to say, but much firmer, well-grounded decisions. And so, yes, the decision to be a B Corp right out of the gates was very, very deliberate. It's like, if we can't measure up to that now, then what chance have we got of measuring up to that in the future? And it's the best global scorecard we have right now for it. So let's see if we can get through it and get past it and honour it. And we could. So that was lucky.
So these values have taken you to an interesting place, because you stepped in with a drive and a purpose around the ocean plastic, and an opportunity with your colleagues building the products, and now it's the commercialization. But what you've set up is quite exciting. I mean, you've gone to the US to run the business from inside the markets, which makes a huge amount of sense. And you're manufacturing rather than taking it offshore for scale, because you're keeping it at home. So tell us a little bit about the journey around your values and the opportunity there that's led you to separate the business almost in the reverse of how we normally see Kiwi businesses scale.
Look, I've been involved in businesses over the last 20 years that did the classic route you've described there, which is to manufacture in China, for example, and then export to the world. And there's good in that. It's enabled some really powerful New Zealand businesses to get going and compete on a global scale. But it's fair to say that most of that was driven, if I go back and look at those businesses, most of that was driven by a profit driver. Yeah. It's like, how do we reduce cost and therefore maximize our profit? And it worked really well for those businesses. But equally, I've always been of the view that if you could eyeball manufacturing on a daily basis, it's happening right there, and have a hand in quality assurance, because that's crucial to the end customer experience. Yeah. And guide quality assurance and what have you. Wouldn't you opt for that if you possibly could? So that was one of the drivers. The designers at Formway, they're very passionate about the product, very passionate about anything they design, and very, they're classic designers. They're perfectionists. They want to see the perfect product. So to have the factory kind of, virtually next door, it's not quite, but virtually next door, and that we felt would enable them to guide that process and shoot for perfection, with every single unit. So that was one thing. Secondly, it's very hard, I think, if you're setting out with these very entrenched sustainable goals, to be absolutely certain about what's happening when you're out of sight, out of mind. Conversely, if you look at New Zealand, there's lots that we've got to work on in New Zealand to improve right across economy and society. But New Zealand's remarkably good at a global level in respect of renewable energy. I think at the moment we're about 82% renewable energy, and that includes all of the fossil fuels we burn through roading and cars and aircraft and what have you. And if you take those away, it's nearly 100%. Of course, it can't take those out of the equation, but I make the point nonetheless. Yeah. In the United States, for example, I think it's 30%. Yeah. So we felt that was the second big driver to manufacture in New Zealand. If we can manufacture down there using largely renewable energy, then that would be an offset to things like sea freight, which is really efficient. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it is very efficient. And it'll be an offset for all of the shipping we were going to do from warehouse to point in the United States. Yeah. So that was a big part of the driver of having it in New Zealand as well. And I guess the third thing is we just felt passionately that we are a New Zealand company trying to take the very best of New Zealand design as we see it to the world. And there's a real advantage, and we're seeing this at a brand level in the United States, in being seen as made in New Zealand, as opposed to made anywhere else, China, Mexico, Bangladesh, India, wherever you choose. I'm not speaking ill of those markets at all as manufacturing centers. I'm just saying that there is a real drive for local manufacture, and if not that, they're manufactured from countries that are seen as quality assured.
Well, if you were to take quite a common stance and just go from designed in New Zealand and manufactured in country X as opposed to designed and manufactured in New Zealand, what would you be giving up in terms of the equity and momentum inside your market?
Andy, forgive me, you cut out briefly there.
Right.
The wonders of Zoom. Do you mind us repeating the question?
It's like we're sending this down a very small pipe. It's very common to have products which are designed in this country, designed in New Zealand and manufactured in country X. But if you go designed and manufactured here, so there must be something that you would lose if you just manufactured somewhere else. What is it about the made in New Zealand piece, not just the thought of incepted here, designed here piece, but the made in New Zealand piece? Why does that matter to such a high degree inside a market like the US?
Well, other than the renewables thing, trust, perception of quality assurance, I think are the two key things. Look, I think the designed in New Zealand, made elsewhere thing has served a lot of New Zealand companies very, very well, and I don't speak ill of it. Yeah. The reality I feel is that New Zealanders are really good at a global level at design thinking, yeah, at being solution focused and coming out with creative solutions for things. Yeah. So that's why I think we've been powered by design successfully over the last, particularly the last 20 years. You've seen a growth in design thinking. Yeah. But we've been less well known for manufacturing. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons for that is because we just hadn't been able to compete at a price level, at a cost level, manufacturing in New Zealand versus offshore. But if you unwind that, you say, well, if you've got outstanding design, don't you want to charge what that outstanding design is worth? And if you do charge what that outstanding design is worth, surely there's sufficient margin between that consumer price point and the cost point to serve the business. Yeah. Maybe it's not quite as profitable as if you manufactured in China, for example, right? Maybe not. Maybe you lose 15 points of GP. I don't know exactly what the number would be, but I reckon that you more than make up for that in market enthusiasm for your product, but precisely because it's made in New Zealand. So the brand affiliate, we get a lot of feedback on live chat, on email, on social up here, for people going, we just love the fact that you're made in New Zealand. And this is from a lot of people who've never been to New Zealand, but they have this perception of what New Zealand is. And certainly right now, there's a huge trust in what New Zealand stands for, trust that New Zealand is empathic and moderate and and that a lot of that's coming through through our Prime Minister and the way in which she's running the country. That's playing incredibly well in a partisan place like the United States. So I think the issue around will manufacturing in New Zealand just erode your profit to unsustainable levels is archaic thinking. Price that value, price that design into your product, and the perception of value in the market in which it drops will be sufficient to ensure that you make enough money to crank a business.
It is. This is like, so what you're suggesting, if we get this right, is that our perception of manufacturing domestically here is actually limited by our ability to be able to engineer enough value into the product. We're actually we're asking the wrong question for the wrong answer in terms of, can we bring manufacturing back to New Zealand? Because we have the smarts and the ability to design our way through problems which other countries can't do. We should actually be looking for higher value onshore manufacturing as opposed to just higher value businesses. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, there's this old phrase, right? There's riches and niches. And my old friend Vincent Herring is fond of quoting that. And like, I believe that. I think New Zealand is never going to be a volume manufacturing centre, nor should it shoot to be. I just don't think that's where we want to be. We're good design thinkers. We're good creative solution creators. And if we can take those powers and drive them into products that have high perceived and genuine inherent value, then we can charge what we. Excuse my phone going off. We can charge what we need to run the business, and yeah, I don't understand why we would think differently. But it's not going to work for everything. You don't want to manufacture pens in New Zealand. There are plenty of pens available in every other market. But are there, speaking from our perspective, are there extraordinary, ergonomic, sustainable chairs manufactured anywhere in the world? No. Yeah. So it's hyper unique. So I think it just comes back to that the thing, how to build a successful brand and business. I think comes back to really basic thinking. It's have you got a compelling and unique brand story? A, have you got unique IP? B, that's in your product. Right? Yeah. C, have you got a committed channel or a way to create a committed channel and a committed market that actually wants what you're about to serve up? Yeah. And if you can put those things together, underpinned by outstanding people, that's the Jim Collins thing, key people in key roles, best people you can get, then New Zealand businesses can be unstoppable manufacturing in New Zealand. Yeah. But we have to go back to be unstoppable manufacturing. We have to go back and use the unstoppable problem solving to get back to innovation, to drive that value, to enable the manufacturing base to come. I mean, inside at the present moment, there's so much protectionism around the world. There's lots of manufacturing being brought back locally from places around the world. Lots of buy local. How are you faring through those headwinds at the present moment? Being a Kiwi company in a market like the US, is buy local balancing off your the novelty and values of New Zealanders, or are you just marching on regardless? Seemingly not so far. I mean, and let's be clear, I'm a big supporter of buy local. I think it's a great movement in the world, but I'm not a massive fan of protectionist behaviours. Yeah. I just think it's a consumer intent, a consumer driver to buy local is a great thing. Builds lots of local commerce. But we're not getting hit hard with any of that blowback, it would seem. And again, I think that's for two reasons. At a regulatory level, we're not really someone that the government up here wants to regulate out of the market. We're kind of cute and cuddly for a start, so that helps. But we're also just not big enough to justify taking extreme measures. So I think that helps at a regulatory level. At a consumer level, again, yes, it's not local, but I think that those other elements I was referencing before of just the general populace, such as it is, the awareness within the general populace of what New Zealand stands for stands us in good stead. It's like the next best thing, I think, for them. If it can't be local, well, let's get it from New Zealand.
You're giving, but you're giving people the opportunity to build a direct relationship with a product that's coming from an interesting place, and part of what's extraordinary, from my opinion, about your story, is the way that channel choice, that your deliberate choice to sell direct, not through intermediated channels, is part of your sustainability strategy. It's giving you back control over the amount of carbon and packaging. Can you just tell us a little bit about your view on how vital it is to control channel if you're very, very committed to maintaining your environmental credentials?
Great products are the heroes of great brands, right? So if you cannot deliver a good product, then your brand's going to crumble over time.
Yeah.
It's been a long-held view of mine. I'm not alone in that. I think that I've lost my train of thought, is what I think right now, Andy.
So it's like it's like, in order to control the control the end-to-end environmental footprint of your products, you have chosen to use direct to consumer as a channel, which is extraordinary, because you claim that going direct to consumer enables you to reduce the environmental impact. This is radical thinking. I'd like to find out more about it, please.
Well asked, Andy.
There we go. Saturday morning questions.
Look, one part of the answer to that is how you think about sustainability. And I don't think about sustainability as just about ecology. I think about it as people too. And if you want to unpack that people component, I'll come back to the ecological component in a moment. But the people component is, part of sustainability is looking after your own people well, but it's also looking after the people to whom you serve.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things you can do for the people to whom you serve is to hold dear to customer experience. Yeah. Because customer experience is where marketing's at, right? If you can deliver a fantastic customer experience, people will come back and again and again, and they'll refer you again and again. So owning that journey, that product journey from first experience of brand through wherever it is, Google or social, onwards to website, great UX, onwards to cart, onwards to purchase, the whole purchase experience and delivery experience, unboxing experience, to me is customer experience, and it's crucial you get that right in the context of sustainability. The second thing is, because you're sustaining your audience through that. The second thing is, I think that has been this historic habit of designing something unique and incredible, mm-hmm. and then charging way too much for it just because you can.
Yep.
And one of the reasons you charge way too much for it just because you can is because of the channel you use to reach your ultimate audience. And typically for a consumer product, it's retail. So, you go in through, and I've done this many times over the years, you go in through a distributor, you lose 33 points. Then they on sell to a retailer, another 30 points. And so by the time it gets to the consumer, it's eye-wateringly expensive. Yeah. And we don't have to do that anymore. And I think it's particularly important for Kiwi businesses to wrap their heads around this. You don't need that old model. You can go direct to customer, and in so doing, you can choose to deliver outstanding design at an accessible price point to the ultimate consumer, which again goes back to customer experience. And the third component is the ecological one. It allows you to say, okay, these are our values. We are going to do some digital research and find our customers by an intersection of their value set, what they search for, where they're shopping, what they're thinking, what they're talking about. And you can do this online. That's the great thing about digital. You can find your market that way. And if you're going to do that, then you can deliver product to them that meets their values. And if you're going to do that, then you've got to honor those values. And for us, it was the ability to own the customer experience from go to woe meant that we could actually ensure that all sustainable materials were used in our packaging and in our product. So the product made from upcycled fishing nets and end-of-life carpet, the packaging made from recycled and recyclable card. There's not a jot of plastic in there anywhere. There's a little bit of tissue paper to stop abrasion. You can define all of that. Whereas if you outsource that to a factory, you may not be able to guarantee that. If you don't manage the process through your 3PL. You may not be able to govern that. We were able to. We said no, only paper tape on the boxes. Thanks. So for us, D2C was about a matrix of things, but one of them was sustainability. It's how do you create and sustain a market? How do you deliver them sustainable product? How do you ensure that your product and your packaging and everything around it is sustainable all the way to the consumer and beyond once they're finished with the packaging? For us, D2C gave us that opportunity to control all of that.
I think control's been going through my head for the last 10 minutes. It's like this is, but it's more than control. This is having the confidence to take control of every aspect. Feeling like you can actually ask your 3PL to move from plastic tape to paper tape. That's confidence. It's a small change, but it's actually the belief that everything that you do actually matters and creates that overall picture. So given the facts, like having the confidence to go direct and to make mistakes yourself, as opposed to getting someone else to make the mistakes for you, must surely change the way you think about expansion across the world as you move from one market to another to another. So how's this obsession with the complete customer journey, the complete experience, obsession with the full supply chain, value chain, the footprints, how is this directing the way that you progress slowly but gradually across the world in order to make a much greater impact to match your original dream?
It's making us more considered, I think. So let me try and explain that. Historically, you design a great product in New Zealand, and you go to trade shows and you try and find distributors in every corner of the earth.
Yeah.
And then you try and get them to build an order book, and you get the factory to start delivering that order book, and you try and get the order of those components right so that you're cash positive and not playing bank and all of those things. But in that process loses a tremendous amount of control over everything that I previously described in my prior answer. An alternate view is to say, well, why don't we go market by market, prove ourselves, learn what we can. But if we're going to do that, let's go to a very big market first. Let's go to the United States, because it's kind of D2C central. If it's there, or China, and I don't speak Mandarin, sadly. So it's America, and it's a market that's more than big enough for us to grow healthily within for quite a period of time. And we don't necessarily need to stretch ourselves. We don't necessarily need to bow to the people who are the endless number of emails we get on a week from people wanting to distribute our product in other markets. We don't need to bow to that. We would if it was purely about profit. But I reckon, and I'm not alone in this, that going down that route is short-termism in thinking. What going down that route says that you might make hay for a little while, a year, 2 years, 5 years. You might grow very, very fast in that time. But I think ultimately you'll kill the brand, because for several reasons. One, too hard to discern whether or not the people between you and the customer do actually honor your values. And if they don't, the customer will figure that out, and you've lost them. Yeah. Too hard to discern whether or not they're actually going to follow your rules around sustainability, ecological sustainability, in which case, again, same problem. You're going to lose. Ultimately, the brand's going to get damaged. I think this way, you can learn from your customers. It is about control up to a point, although just accepting for a moment that you never really control your brand. The brand exists in the minds of your customers. All you can control is what you believe and how you honor those beliefs, and how open you are to feedback from customers. Yeah. And we are getting a lot of feedback, mostly good, but every now and then they'll have a crack. Yeah. And I think the way to deal with that is to go straight back to them and say, that's outstanding feedback. Thank you. We're not perfect. We're not wearing halos. Yeah. We are just trying to improve day by day. You can only really do that when you've got focus. So you go narrow and deep in a market, get real focus, learn everything you can about how the customers think. And then once you're confident, you've got enough cash flow, then you go and do it again. You build a new team and with similar values in another market, and you go again. I think that's for me, that's a long-term sustainable way to grow a brand out in New Zealand. It's
true. So what it's like from this, the needs to follow that niche. there's riches and niches, like you said, quoting Vincent from a little bit earlier. But if there are riches and niches, you need to be able to follow that niche to its end inside of markets. You can't dip in and then get distracted somewhere else. It feels a little bit like it's important to keep your aspiration in check and not to get distracted from what you're doing, and not to think that rapid growth is sustainable growth. Are you finding that you're having to call on your determination and resolve a lot more than you might have done in your previous roles when it was scale for other people?
It's an excellent question, an interesting one. I had to think about that. I'll answer this way. I like growing things, and I like growing them fast, and I don't like mucking around and what have you. So in a sense, I'm struggling with that, with this way of doing things. I sort of want to throw 10 times the budget at social, at paid social, because I know that the ROI is actually sensational, and I would like to go faster, but I think it is a good way to go. I have found the process of getting this thing out of the gates, particularly in the States, has tested me at a personal level, tested my resilience way more than anything in the past, way more. And I've gone through some interestingly torrid times at different businesses for different reasons. But this has been stressful. But at the same time, it's a hell of an adventure. It's a hell of a ride, and you wouldn't choose to do everything we've chosen to do in the middle of the most partisan political environment in the history of America, the most broken health environment the world has seen in recent times, or in the middle of the greatest social unrest arguably that America or the world has ever seen. So we've timed it appallingly, and that's added to the stress, and I've had to dig deep on resilience. But having said all of that, we're out of the gates, and it's growing, and it's doing well, and that feels really good. So
what have you? This is a really interesting time in the US. I mean, you have picked your years. To be fair, you've done a good job with that. But it's like coming through this. Then what has surprised you about trading a business direct to consumers inside the US, when plainly there's so much social change and social unrest and just challenges in everybody's life? What are your lessons?
Sort of damn the torpedoes, because you just don't know what's around the corner, do you? You never can know, and I have long lived by, personally and professionally, by the adage, what if it goes right? Because, and I didn't come up with it. An old colleague of mine, Phil Brace, who's an extremely talented designer in his own right, came up with that, and I just purloined it straight away. I am often guilty of looking at the downside, often, and getting down on the chops. And so a phrase like that often brings me back. I've got it on my wall. What if it goes right? Because sometimes you just got to say, look, just damn it, we'll do it anyway. And what could possibly really be worse than what we've got right now? Yeah. Come COVID, a few months ago, we did have a discussion about, well, do we just delay this thing again? Because we'd already delayed launch a few times. Yeah. Do we delay it again and just ride this thing out? Because we'd had to cancel our New York launch week with all these events and media events and engagements and all of these sorts of things. And then we had to cancel the virtual version of that because bandwidth was limited. Yeah. Everything was kind of ranged against us. But in the end, we said, no, we've got a really good story and a really good product. Let's just get out of here, get it out in the hands of enthusiastic customers, and it'll be slower, and that won't be quite as exciting, but it'll, we'll be underway and we'll learn some stuff. Yeah. So we wouldn't have chosen to launch in the middle of all of this had we had a crystal ball 18 months ago, but what we didn't, you never do. And I think for others looking on saying, God, how do we think about the next 1, 2, 5 years? You know, is there going to be economic doom and gloom? Is this COVID thing going to stick around for that period? We don't know. So just don't put your life on hold and don't put your business on hold. Just figure out a way of going forth anyway. And again, just coming back to the D2C thing, I think that's a methodology for that, because it's relatively lean in its execution.
Yeah, if your cry here is actually just maintain momentum, just keep doing things, keep moving forward, keep executing the plan, then when you control the full end-to-end plan here, then not only do you have a lot to engage with, but you've also got a lot of adaptability and a lot of flexibility in where the costs are and how to weather out times which get better or get worse. So it's like sustainability here is been right through this conversation. But this is, it kind of feels like this model that you've taken is other people might call it prudent, but it's sustainable. It's actually it's good for you and for your shareholders. It's good for the environment. It's great for customers. It's great for brand New Zealand. There should be a huge number of lessons out of this for the people hopefully watching. What I'd love to touch on just before we have to go is how Brand New Zealand is tracking through this crisis in the US at the present moment. Because if you think about what Brand New Zealand stands for, I mean, you've pretty much ticking every box. It's sustainable, it's high quality, it's led by very purposeful design thinking. It solves problems in people's lives. It's like just about every, apart from actually wearing an all black shirt, it's pretty much got everything covered. How optimistic are you that the behaviour of New Zealand businesses in the US markets will help to support and strengthen that brand positioning for the country over time? Or do you think there's some risks that we may lose the shine of what New Zealandness means to the market over there?
There's always risk of that, because, you know, an event can turn perception of a brand, whether it's a country or a company, you know, exceedingly rapidly. There's two parts to your question. One is how New Zealand businesses that are already here or planning to be here can trade off what's gone on, or the perception of Brand New Zealand. And the second thing is, what is the perception of Brand New Zealand? So let me start with the second of those, which was actually the first of your questions. You know, there will be people who watch this who are ranged across the political spectrum, and some of them will have very, very firmly held views that are counter to our current leader, current Prime Minister, current government, and the opposite will be the case too. I have not always voted left or right. I've tended to vote for the team that I think is the best team for the moment. Yeah. And I think that, leaving aside a lot of the stardust, I think Jacinda Ardern is a very unique individual, and I think she is generationally exceptional as a leader. And the reason I say that is because she is unique to this generation. She has a different style of leader from prior generations of leadership. And I've long felt that prior generations of leadership have been a little bit broken in the way they think, a bit militaristic, a bit, you know, hierarchical, and she doesn't strike me as that. Similarly, she's deeply empathic and deeply principled, values driven and deeply empathic. She genuinely cares. One of the things that I do when I hire people these days is I cut to the chase after a while and just say, give me an example of the last time you truly cared about something, and what was it? And I don't really care whether they say this morning when my cat jumped on because I just love my cat, or last summer when I went to fight the whaling in the Southern Ocean because I feel passionately that should stop. What I care about is whether they can hook into the concept of caring. And I think it's a great thing that we've got to that place in history where caring and empathy is so much more pronounced and prominent and important and embraced. And we're seeing that in our Prime Minister. Does she do everything perfectly? Doubtless no. But what she has done for Brand New Zealand, I think, is inestimable. Across 3 years nearly, she's traversed some extraordinary events. Extraordinary, 3 unbelievable events in the history of New Zealand. And she's managed them incredibly well. She's managed her team incredibly well. She's gathered a team. She's got some incredible talent in her team. She's built an incredibly talented team that's very loyal. All of that is obvious up here in the States. It's fascinating the extent to which that has been followed, that is reported on. You cannot go a week without something that's happening in New Zealand being reported on in the press up here, whether it's the Washington Post or the New York Times, or and it's all for the right reasons. So I say that brand New Zealand has never been stronger in the eyes of Americans, and never been stronger for the right reasons. And this is the important thing. It's not about 100% pure New Zealand, which has massive issues underneath it. We know that we're poisoning rivers and we shouldn't be. So it's not about that. It's actually about caring, empathy, leadership in a modern world. And those are the things that are stacking up for Americans about the way in which we go about doing things. Now, if a company from New Zealand comes to America or is in America and reflects those same values, then I think they will trade incredibly well up here, and they should trade off those brand values of New Zealand. And secondly, I think they won't damage the brand. The brand New Zealand I'm talking about, they will only build it for future generations of New Zealanders.
That's extraordinary. So what we're looking at actually through the eyes of the US customer at the present moment is the rise of empathy as being the foundation value of New Zealand. Do you think over time, if we continue, because if we take your business model as a template, where it's about building genuine relationships with customers, about being obsessive about every single aspect of their care, that you are there for them. There's no middle people in this. That just business models support that empathetic view. The way that we communicate supports it. The way we design products supports it as well. But most importantly, the way that we relate to each other and support each other as the response to this crisis reflects it too. Is there a time, do you think, where empathy will become more important in the way the world sees us than clean, green, typical New Zealand?
I think right now is the time when it's become more important. I think it's the number one thing that we are currently known for as a culture.
Yeah.
And yes, if you unpack what's going on in New Zealand, there are any number of examples you could give for where that's not playing out in the way it ought to, and that's particularly around socio-democracy, lower socio-debt protection, and improvement of the lot of particularly Māori, but also Pacific Islanders. We're not doing enough on those things, right? And we're also not doing enough to look after our rivers. And you could argue, of course, that erodes our brand value, national brand value of caring. And I would agree with that. It does.
Yeah.
But I still think that the thing that we are really known for right now in the world is our style of leadership, our style of togetherness, our style of teamwork, all of which is underpinned, connected by empathy.
Yeah.
So right now is that time, I would say, Andy. Will it always be that case? You'd hope so.
Yeah.
The cynic in me says possibly not, but it's up to the next generation to ensure that is the case.
Yeah, I think you're making a really clear case here that everybody in this country has to go back and look at the values that underpin their behaviours as businesses and make sure that they're actually expressed front and center, because it's like if this is where our brand is going and this is what creates connection and stability in our businesses, then nobody can pretend that values exist when they're not being demonstrated in the way that you do business. It's the start of hopefully the start of a new era. Just finally, before we go, if there was anybody here who's looking to try to step into the US, but hasn't done before, there's been lots of conversations over the last few months in these webinars and interviews. We've talked about the Kiwi Network over in the US, about people like yourself supporting people entering the country to try to stand together, to collaborate, to share our values, to create greater security. How important was that for you when entering into the US, and what advice have you got for people who are considering it to connect into fellow Kiwis, to get inspired and to get grounded and hopefully get some momentum?
It's so essential, and I don't know why anyone wouldn't. I've been a huge supporter of collaboration amongst New Zealand businesses, even apparently competing businesses, for a long time. We built the craft beer collective when I was at Tuatara with some other competing beer brands in order to take us more as a collective to the UK to crack the UK market, because they weren't really wanting to talk to one little single craft beer brand, but they would talk to a portfolio. And we had to be prepared to share a little bit of IP there, what's actually going on underneath the bonnet. So you've got to be able to trust, and you've got to know you want to work with the people there. But I think you're fools not to tap into the Kiwi network up here. Kiwis are pretty good as a general rule of thumb, and we're not necessarily unique in this globally, but we're pretty good at just answering the phone if someone calls, or if someone says, "Hey mate, would you mind talking to X because he's going to do what you're going to do?" And it doesn't seem to matter how successful that the individual is that's being asked to do that. So for example, Tim Brown at Allbirds, I had a bit to do with. I didn't know him terribly well, but I had a bit to do with him. And I just gave him a call and sort of said, "Look, can you just talk me through this? Would you be prepared to just unpack what I'm saying in my brand proposition and in our strategy?"
Yeah.
And he was awesome. He gave me so much time around that, and we met up again for a coffee at a little conference in Auckland sometime after that. Had another session, and he's since been supportive periodically, multiple times. Yeah. So he's a great example of a Kiwi in the diaspora who is generous with his time. He doesn't want to muck around. He's very forthright, and that's fantastic if you can cope with that. Yeah. But he's just one example of many Kiwis in the Kiwi diaspora who are prepared to do that. I mean, I'm all sorts of people in America. Ronnie Peters and over in New York, he's running Hyperloop at the moment. And you can connect to them via Kia or NZTE or both. Yeah. And they're really good actually at working together up here in the States. I've been really impressed with the personnel at NZTE, both in New Zealand and up here, and the way in which they've connected the dots for us. So, because most of the value for me is in the connections. It's not necessarily International Growth Fund, although that's powerful too. It's actually the network that you can talk to. You go, "I've got this problem, I don't know how to think about it." And you ring them and they say, "You should talk to X," and away you go. Yeah. And I really hope that more Kiwi businesses get used to the idea that modern business should be done out of New Zealand by sharing IP, being prepared to give up IP. It's not the secret sauce necessarily of what drives your business, but it is a sort of a playbook, if you like. Here's what works, here's what doesn't. Don't do those things. You don't need to do them. You don't need to make those mistakes. Just here's what I've learned. Go do those things instead. Yeah. Because we should try and help the next generation of businesses to be more successful than our set of businesses were.
Yeah, we are all in it together, and it takes confidence to reach out, but it's reassuring to hear that the networks through Kia and through NZTE actually do some of the initial groundwork for you, and that's when you're over there in the market, then generally you're never alone. You're not that far from home.
No, it's amazing the number of people, and they're often quite local.
Yeah. Well, Richard, we need to let you go out. So I understand you're going to a drive-in movie today, just to prove that you are in fact living in the US, and it couldn't get more American than that.
Yeah. I'm going to be playing the theme tune to Happy Days all the way there for the children. Yeah.
You're rocking the funds. Just go for it, man. It's been absolutely delightful. Talking to you this morning. It's like, thank you so much for all your time and for the inspiration here. What you're doing is amazing with that business model and with the focus, and we all wish you the very best and look forward to hearing how you're getting on in the coming months.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take good care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.